What's up YouTube? KS Gun Guy here. Thanks for joining me today as always. So I've got another CZ for us today. Now I know, been a little bit CZ crazy on the channel. Don't worry, I'll be wheeling in a couple of Glocks here very soon just to sort of redeem myself a little bit and get back to my roots. But I've been exploring CZs for a very particular reason. They put out really good quality firearms, and I've got one here in front of us today, the CZ75 P-01 Omega. Now you've probably seen a couple of these around, and this just caught my eye because first, it's an Omega, and I'll get to that here in just a moment, but it's also in the urban gray finish, and I think it just really looked pretty cool. So we're going to take a look at this and just kind of dive deep into it and see what this thing is all about. Let's go ahead and knock a couple of specs out of the way here real quick. The overall length is 8 inches. Now this includes a threaded barrel in it. The height is 5.7 inches. The barrel length is 4.4 inches. Now the width, I'll give you a good look at that. It's going to be 1.38 inches. The weight unloaded is 29 ounces, so it's a stout little fella for sure. Now the magazine capacity, and they are all steel magazines, for the Omega for this particular model is 16 rounds. The standard P-01 is 14 rounds. So get a couple of extra rounds in this, which is kind of nice. Now, the frame material on this is aluminum, so although it's a little bit heavier at 29 ounces, it's not quite as heavy as some of its all-steel bigger brothers. The action on this is a double action, single action firearm, and of course we'll take a look at the trigger here before entirely too long, but it is hammer driven. You've got your two different pulls, double action and single action. And then from a safety standpoint, now again, this is the Omega series, so it does have the decocker installed. However, you can switch that out for a safety if you prefer. Now, I don't like safeties on firearms like these. Really, 1911s would be the only firearms that I prefer as safety. So I like the option of the decocker, and of course, it is ambidextrous out of the box. From a feature standpoint, it's got a lot of things going for it. Now, if you've followed the channel and if you've picked up on a couple of different videos that I've done, as well as on the Wednesday night chats with Big Johnson Guns and Gear in 1776 or Bust, I've talked about another P-01. I actually had a standard P-01 much earlier in the channel, and I'll tell you, I didn't like it very much. In fact, so much so that I didn't even feature it on the channel. I just walked away from it. But I really wanted to give it a try again because those guys and a lot of the other guys in the group have really touted the P-01 as a fantastic firearm. So having found the Omega series and also just this look and this particular configuration altogether, I really wanted to try it again. And spoiler alert a little bit, I've been really impressed so far. Again, from a feature standpoint, a couple of things. Now, from a grip standpoint, I'll give you a good look at these grips here. You'll notice that there's a lot of contour going on all around the grip there, and so that was one of the things that I struggled with a little bit because there's a little bit of contour, especially up here towards the top of the grip and just all around. It's sort of an odd gun to get a hold of. Now, once you get used to it, it's actually quite comfortable, but it just takes a little while to get used to, and I'm eventually going to be switching out these grips for something else, maybe a lock grip or something like that. I know a lot of people say very good things about that, so we'll have to see how that works out. But these are just kind of a rubber grip. They've definitely got some texture on them. I mean, I'll let you look at that here for just a moment or two. There is definitely texture, and you can feel it, but I've noticed, and I've got slightly sweaty hands, they tend to get just a little bit sweaty, and they get a little bit slick as well. Now, there is not any checkering or anything like that. They're actually just some vertical lines on the back strap, and then on the front strap, same thing, just some vertical lines. So from, again, a grip standpoint, I would say that this is a little bit more slick. I think it could definitely use a little bit more checkering, just a little bit more aggressive of a grip, and hopefully some aftermarket grip plates or grip panels will help that just a little bit. Now, again, I said this is a 16-round magazine, so it does have a base plate on it, just a little bit bigger magazine. Now, one of the really nice things about this, the magazines are interchangeable with larger magazines in the CZ75 family. So this is actually an 18-round magazine from my SP-01 Phantom, and that fits just fine. I've used that a couple of times at the range, so it's nice to have some options and a little bit of interchangeability and a little bit of flexibility in terms of capacity. So kind of a nice option there. there. And then in terms of magwells, this magwell actually is flared just a little bit. Give you a good look at that. So they've tried to do a really nice job of really finishing the firearm and giving it some really nice, if not subtle, features. So very good there. And then from a magazine release standpoint, it is not ambidextrous out of the box. However, you can very easily swap this around. So definitely has some ambidextrous qualities to it, not only with your decocker, but also the mag release. However, the slide lock slide release, which is right here, which also doubles as your takedown lever, is not ambidextrous. So I think I've read on a couple of forums that you can actually switch it around, but most people have commented that that really doesn't work very well. I have not tried that. I really have no need to, but anyway, so it is not ambidextrous. From a takedown standpoint, and I generally don't take down firearms in videos. I think that gets just a little bit boring, and trying to take this one down might be a bit of a challenge going around a camera like this. But you do have to line up a couple of notches that are here on the back of the firearm. You'll see those. And you have to line those up to about, and trying to do this on camera again is a bit of a challenge, but line them up right there. And as they are lined up, you actually have to turn around the firearm and push out this little pin right here. I generally do that with the butt of a magazine or something like that, and that will push out your lever, and you can pull it out the rest of the way and then slide your slide off and you're good to go. You do not have to pull the trigger on it, so kind of nice there. Now, it does have an accessory rail for your lights, lasers, grenade launchers, as you would expect, even on a slightly smaller firearm like this, the threaded barrel notwithstanding. So that's really it from a frame standpoint. Of course, you do have a beaver tail here, and you can actually ride up on this pretty high. I'll give you a look at that. So it does, again, sit reasonably nicely in the hand. And again, as I was shooting this, it felt just a little bit better than the original P-01. Again, we'll take a look at that trigger and some shooting as we move along. From a slide standpoint, it does have serrations on the rear and the front, and they are definitely usable. Now, I've said a lot of times on these CZs, because these rails are actually sitting inside the frame, that makes that slide just sit a little bit lower in the frame. There's a little bit less real estate to grab onto. However, it is absolutely doable. Now, a lot of people say that these particular CZs were really designed to run the slide from the back like that, and that is definitely true. However, you can certainly do an overhand rack. It's not a big deal. That's generally how I run a gun, and it works just fine on this. But these front serrations are also usable as well, especially if you need to do press checks or anything like that. Now, one of the most unusual features of this particular firearm, you'll notice these are suppressor height night sights. And I will say from a sight perspective, and I'll line that up for you again, although I thought, man, these are super tall sights and they look a little bit unusual, at the range, they actually do a really good job. They're reasonably easy to pick up. From a night sight standpoint, they glow incredibly bright. So really good quality night sights. And they did really well. So at first I thought I was going to change these sights out pretty quick. I actually don't think I'm going to. They work really well. Now, one unusual thing about these sights, and I am going to muzzle you just a little bit for a moment or two, we've already checked that it's clear, you'll notice that these sights actually have dots on the other side, both on the front and the rear. And so for whatever reason, I guess you could swap these around and have them not be night sights and have them just be kind of a standard, almost like a backwards Novak style rear sight and then a backwards front sight. I don't really know why they did that. It's a bit unusual, especially because they have good quality night sights on the other side, but I suppose if you wanted to flip them around, you could. So just kind of an odd, interesting little deal there. You'll notice it does have serrations on the front to reduce glare just a little bit. Hard to capture these in the light, but they are definitely there. So it's a very interesting firearm, and the one thing that I would recommend if you've got a firearm like this, you probably already know it though, if you're going to be shooting it at the range, you definitely want to take your thread protector off unless you're going to Loctite it on, because it will eventually work its way off. So just something to keep in mind there. But again, overall, from a construction standpoint, from a look standpoint and a feature standpoint, the P-01 Omega has actually been a real pleasure and a lot of fun. So when we come back, we're going to take a look at the trigger and see how that does with this Omega system. But first, let's go ahead and take a look at a little bit of shooting and see how this guy does. Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed that footage at the range. So from a shooting perspective, the P-01 Omega actually did a really good job. It was a lot of fun. It was a real pleasure to shoot, and I attribute that to a couple of things. First, those sights, although very tall and a little bit gangly looking, really were very easy to pick up at the range, and they didn't seem like they were making the gun shoot entirely too low, which I really thought it would. They actually worked out quite well. Now the gun also sitting at 29 ounces makes it a little bit heftier and a little bit easier to shoot from a perhaps a recoil or a muzzle flip standpoint. And again, that slide sitting relatively low in the frame also helps a little bit too. So again, from a shooting perspective, I mean, it really did very well. Now we're going to go ahead and take a look at the trigger and see what it's all about. And of course, I've got some dummy rounds loaded in the magazine just to help out a little bit. I do not like to dry fire double action, single action firearms or any hammer firearms. I mean, call me crazy, but it's just something I learned as a child. So I've generally stuck with that. So from a trigger perspective, again, this being the Omega trigger, it's just a slightly different system than your standard CZ trigger, that accentuated, very curved trigger, which generally speaking, I don't like very much. Now, I recently did a couple of videos on the CZ SP-01 Phantom, and it turns out I actually like that trigger reasonably well, but part of that is because the grip is just a little bit different. It sits different in my hand, and so for whatever reason it works. But the P-01, the regular one, it just really didn't feel very good. Whether I use the pad of my finger or my first knuckle, which I generally do, I've got pretty large fingers, or long fingers rather, it just didn't work. So this one just worked reasonably well. Now the double action pull on the P-01 comes in around 10.5 pounds, so it's actually a pretty stout trigger. So let's go ahead and take a look at that just a couple of times and see how this thing does. So I will say, although it's very stout, it is an incredibly smooth, very easy to pull trigger, even again going through that 10.5 pounds. So there's your pull right there, and I'm going to chuck that dummy round out, and we'll take a look at the reset. And there's your reset right there. I mean, it's not a very short reset. Most CZs generally don't have a very short reset, just stock triggers, even the Omega triggers. So you have to kind of be mindful of that, or at least I do, because I generally shoot more striker-fired firearms than double action, single action. But again, it does reasonably well, and I'll go ahead and do that again. Again, coming in at 10.5 pounds, so it is pretty meaty for sure, but it is very smooth. Again, chuck that round out there and get your reset again right there, and then back at the start. Now, from a single action standpoint, it comes in roughly at 4.5 pounds, and once again, extremely smooth. Now, of course, there is hardly any uptake here. I'll give you a look at that. I mean, it's really right up there at the wall, ready for your break. And then you've got your break right there. And again, we'll get your reset right there. So again, it's a silky smooth trigger without any question, although again, that double action trigger pull is relatively stout, 10.5 pounds. That is definitely not one of the lighter triggers in the collection, but again, from a shooting standpoint, the P-01 Omega definitely did a very good job, and it was very impressive. So what do I think of the CZ75 P-01 Omega overall? Well, overall, I really like it. I mean, I think it's a really well-made gun. I think it definitely looks really good. I love that urban gray finish on it. I mean, I think it's a sharp-looking gun, if nothing else. It's a little bit unusual because it's got those tall sights and it's got the threaded barrel on it. But overall, again, I really like it. Now, there are a couple of things I ding it on a little bit. Again, those grips, I'm not quite as fond of. I want to get some thinner grips for this. I think that's going to make it work just a little bit better for me. And then the thread protector on here, again, having to remove that. Oh, it's not a big deal at all. I know that's nitpicky, but just one more thing to think of, and I'm afraid at some point in time when I take this to the range, I'm going to forget, and that thing's going to fly off and roll down the range. And I'll have to depend on the guys at Centerfire Shooting Sports to pick that up later on in the day, whatever it is. So hopefully that won't happen. But overall, again, the fit and finish, the construction, the look of the firearm, the shootability of the firearm, I think it's absolutely fantastic. And again, featuring a lot of CZs over the last few months on the channel, One thing about CZ I have to give them credit for, they make good quality guns. They really do, and they run the gamut in price. So you've got a lot of options out there if you want to get into and explore CZs, especially from a double action, single action standpoint. Just a lot of options out there. So that's the CZ75 P-01 Omega. Now I'm really looking forward to hearing what you guys have to say about this. If you've got some experience with a P-01 or P-01 Omega or any of the series in the family, I'm always looking forward to those comments there, so be sure to leave one. Otherwise, thanks so much for joining me today, and I will see you next time.
Focused on my own way, with a never looking back.